So my name is Tintin He,
My name is Xingyi Li.
and we are here on November 16th, 2017, interviewing Natalie Ong for the Houston Asian American Archive.
Yes, my Japanese name is Kayo, so it's Natalie, Kayo Natalie, and Hayashida is my maiden name, Ong, O-N-G. And Al and I have been married for over 51 years. But we started in Seattle, so my family and my background is in the Pacific Northwest. But we have lived in Houston since '67, and in the city of El Lago, which is a suburb of Houston, since 1969.
So where and when were you born?
I was born on February 20th, 1941, on a little island, Bainbridge Island, which is a ferry ride from downtown Seattle. It's an agricultural community. My father and my grandfathers were berry farmers. So my grandparents emigrated to the Seattle area in like 1906, 1904, at the turn of the century. So my parents, both my mother and father and their siblings, were all born in the U.S. So I would be what they'd consider in the Japanese community as a sansei, which is the third generation. And my kids and grandkids would be yonsei, and I don't know what the fifth would be. But yes, so my connection to Japan is not very strong. Although because I am Japanese and my face is Japanese, and my grandparents came from Japan, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, I think the biggest thing was all Americans, including Americans of Japanese descent, were taken away from their homes and moved inland into concentration camps. And a lot of people in Texas don't know that it happened to Americans who not only were children, but born in the U.S.
So how old were you at the time?
I was 13 and a half months.
Oh.
So I was a baby. And my mother was in her 30s, early 30s, pregnant with my brother when that picture was taken. I think you saw that picture of a woman carrying a baby as they were leaving Bainbridge Island to go to California. Yes.
So do you have any memories of that
No.
at all?
You know, I don't remember what happened 13 months ago, let alone what happened when I was 13 months. Yeah, I really don't. I've heard stories, and like most oral histories, you know, stories might not be true, but I've heard stories, and I've certainly regretted not asking more questions of my father and mother during that period. So I appreciate what you guys are doing to try to get some oral histories while that oral history is still, you know, fresh in people's minds, because you do forget.
So what are the stories that you remember?
What do I remember? Not probably of that period. I can remember stories after, you know, second and third grade, those kinds of things, after we returned. And one of the stories of our family is that because my parents were American born, they were able to own property. There was that exclusion where you couldn't not only marry but become citizens or own property if you were not American born. And since my father was, we had a place to come back to after the concentration camps, the American concentration camps, the relocation where they relocated us. So we had a place to come back to and a community that welcomed us, which was kind of unusual too, because Bainbridge Island was a small community, and I think the Japanese and the American families knew each other quite well. There was only one high school, so all the kids either went to two different elementary schools and then merged into the one high school, so the families knew each other quite well.
So you were able to return to your
We were able to
hometown?
return to our home, yes.
And your actual house too?
Yes, in the actual house that my father and my uncles built on property that my grandparents, you know, had farmed, strawberry farmers.
Did your parents know how long you were going to be in the camp?
No,
Or did
they had no
did they bring property and
No, they
things?
had no idea how long they would be away. In fact, I've asked them, why they wore their nicest direct clothing, because they said, well, we didn't know where we were going, we didn't know how long we would be away. And as it turned out, going from Seattle to the deserts in Mojave, California was quite a change. And they could only take what they could carry. So can you imagine my mom being pregnant? I had an older brother who's only 18 months older than I, and then me, and she being pregnant. She said most of what she could carry was, and then we had to bring the bedding, the sheets for the beds. So what she had mostly were diapers and sheets. And, each child was allowed to bring a toy, and there's a picture with me holding some soft animal or of some sort. But at 13 months, I probably didn't realize what I was holding.
How did the people persuade the Japanese to evacuate? I mean, what were the consequences? I haven't studied this.
Oh, you haven't studied. I did say that you probably needed to look into it. It was the FBI came, the armies with guns and rifles with bayonets on it. They said, you're going. They gave us 7 days to close up our business. And of course, this was in March, and our crops would have been harvested beginning in May and June. So it was a really difficult time for our family. And economically, we really lost the crop for that year and subsequent years, because you can't just plant them and expect them to be marketed in the next year. You have to wait 2, possibly 3 years in order to. So we were quite disadvantaged financially, but we did have some place to come back to. But when we came back, our equipment was gone. The house was a mess. I don't know what happened to our horse, but because I vaguely remember when we got another one. Back then, if you're a poor farmer, you use the horse to plow. Yeah. And I really do not remember any of that, but I've been told that, hey, at least our family was together. But it was a real hardship.
And how old were you when you came back?
When I came back, I was there for 3.5 years. Can you imagine being away for 3.5 years? That's a long time. So I came back like at 4, because I left at 13 months, 4.5. Time to go to kindergarten. Yeah.
Was there any adjusting to the outside world after you kind of?
Well, for me personally, being that young, and no, I did not have any time for any adjustments to make. I do know that our family certainly did. Mom said she was a stay-at-home mom, of course, with 3 kids or 2 kids before the war. But she cleaned house for $1 an hour. Had, I think, 4 different places that she cleaned. So that, because, like I said, there was no income coming off the strawberries for the first year or so. Fortunately, we did have some savings, but I'm sure that was soon gone if you have, 2 years of no money coming in.
Okay, so could you describe sort of the living conditions of the camp?
Well, I have seen pictures, and my mom said that when we went, we had mattresses stuffed with straw. They had, because it was an army installation, of course it was the WRA, World War Relocation Authority or something like that, but it was the Army that was the DOD. So we had Army rations, Army blankets, Army cots. She did say that they were issued a mop and a bucket, and of course it was just a room with the cots and the bedding, with the cots. Actually, Mom said there were 2 cots only for our family. Since I was only 13 months, I slept with my mother. My older brother slept with my father on one of the cots. And my brother was born in August, and he said the people in there were very shops, different shops, and people were assigned to do jobs, either to sustain the camp, either working in the mess hall or a carpentry shop. And my father said that the people in the carpentry shop made a little crib-like thing for my brother when he was born. Yeah, and there was a potbelly stove there. And Mom said that because she had little ones, instead of going to the mess hall 3 times a day when they would ring, the little ones got to go to a mid-morning snack and a mid-afternoon snack. And I think all the Japanese, you'll read a lot about everyone's experiences. Depending on your age, you had a different experience. I certainly had an experience just being with my family, so I didn't see anything different. Mom and Dad would have had a different experience trying to cope with, living in those kinds of conditions when they were, quite well off before the war. And of course the teenagers, who had a great time, because instead of being in a farming community that they'd have to walk or whatever for miles to get to the next families, they were able to just go down the block or go down the street or whatever. So they had lots of activities for teenagers, dances and movies and parties and all that. And these teenagers didn't have to work in their family farms. So they had a pretty easy time, or a nice time.
So who would organize that?
It was the government. It was the executive order signed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and there are a lot of discussions about why that was done just to the Japanese, and not just Japanese aliens, but Japanese. Most of them were American citizens. They were not from Japan. The older generation had the choice of, we all had a choice, I guess, of moving inland, but if you have 3 little kids and you were hoping that you could get back soon, you didn't want to start a life inland, but some did. And like I said, those that were born in Japan were given an option to go back to Japan, but a lot of them, would have no life in Japan. It was an executive order. It wasn't a command from the president, who was the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, who asked that the military round up every Japanese and move them away from the West Coast, because I think they thought that a Japanese could not be trusted, whether it was your great-grandparents who, was in Japan. And anyway, it didn't happen to the Italians in that way. It didn't happen to the Germans in that way. It happened to the Japanese. And there are a lot of reasons why they think it was not just prejudicial, but economic. The Japanese were making a lot of inroads in the farming and had some really nice properties in California and in Washington State. So you'll have people saying that part of the reason the executive order was signed was not just a war necessity, but economics and war hysteria and prejudice.
Was everyone aware at the time of the reasons why you were being interned?
Do you mean my family or the other Japanese Americans?
Yeah, your family and everyone in general. Like, the teenagers seemed to be having fun, but did they know that
Did
this
they
was...
know why? I think they knew why. But, everybody now has so much more political clout than they did back then. Because my father said, well, we just did what the government told us we should do. We were Americans. We wanted to be good Americans. We didn't have many alternatives. What could we do? When the government says go, you go. Like the stop signs say stop, you stop. You don't just go on ahead and say, oh, well, I'm an American, I could do whatever I want. No, you can't. There's always somebody telling you what to do. And, of course, I'm sure they were shocked that the Japanese, their parents, families, would wage war on America. So I think there was a lot of things going on. I can't imagine having 7 days to decide whether you were going to stay or go with the government promising that they'd take care of you, or you know what? What would you do?
I don't know. I would move back to China.
Yeah, but if you've never been there, like my parents had never been to Japan. My mother did because on her side, her mom and dad were quite wealthy, and they did very well, and so they would send the kids back in the summertime and all. So, but if like my father, he didn't even speak Japanese, and his parents left before the war, and left him and his older sister in charge of the kids. In fact, I saw something where my father would say that it was really my older sister that taught me to speak English. Anyway. Yeah, I
So-
wondered those questions too, and I wish I had asked my family.
Like afterwards, did they feel like it was unjust?
Oh,
Or
of course. Yeah.
But at the time, they didn't.
At the time, I guess, like I said, they just chose to do what the government told them to do, with promises that they'd be taken care of, and hopefully they would have a place to come back to in a few months. Little did they know that it would be 3.5 years. Oh my gosh. Maybe they would have chosen to do something else had they known, but nobody knew when the war would end, or how it would end, or how it would affect them personally. Because in the meantime, there was litigation and judicial questions being raised, and the courts getting involved too when they were first put into the camps. Yeah.
So, at what point did you realize that, like your family were sent to the concentration camp? Like, did your parents told you after you got back?
They always talked about camp, and it wasn't something that I felt I had either had a bad experience with. I did know they moved off the Japanese Americans, and I do know that we came back and tried to resume life, which we actually didn't, because my father left farming and our family moved to Seattle so he could have a regular paycheck with Boeing Company, because when you're a farmer, you don't really know what your regular paycheck is going to be like. And I should have asked a lot of questions, but I was in a community that accepted us, and everyone in the area, all the Japanese Americans went through, most of them. There were a handful of family friends that chose not to go to the relocation centers. But most of the kids just, grew up. That was just part of where they grew up, and everyone had a shared experience in that. So we didn't think of it as being terribly unusual. I didn't anyway. Mm-hmm. When I got older, married and came to Texas, and nobody in Texas knew that had happened to the Japanese Americans, and that it was, not just those that were immigrants from Japan, but those that were born in the U.S., their children, and that's 3 generations that had to go off. Yeah. So but I don't recall a lot of what happened after that. Like I said, I've heard stories, and I've been on pilgrimages where we actually have visited the sites where we were incarcerated, either in Manzanar, California, or later the Bainbridge Island group moved to Minidoka, Idaho, where most of the Seattleites and most of relatives and friends had been moved to. So I have been to those centers, and you can see that they're army barracks, and you can see that they're wood floors with knots, and you could see that they should have been isolated. Now it's getting to be there's a lot of development around there, but you could see how they were moved into an isolated area with barbed wire fencing and guards, sentry guards, and censored mail, and a lot of things that you wouldn't expect that would have happened to Americans.
So after you had gotten back, how did your community feel about the internment.
Are you talking about the community of Bainbridge Island on the whole, or just the Japanese Americans?
Yeah, on the whole, and also like how much of Bainbridge Island was Japanese that had been.
Well, there were
interned.
270 people on Bainbridge Island that were asked to leave. Some chose to go inland. I think that there were 3 big families that did, but most of them have a shared experience in having been rounded up and put on a boat, shipped, taken to Seattle, which is, like right now with those big ferries that they have, it's like 40 minutes away, but back then it probably was an hour and a half away. Put on a train, not knowing where you were going. The trains had blackout shades, so you couldn't see in or out, or they couldn't see in. A day and a half later, we were in Manzanar, California. Now, when we came back, we were actually welcomed back by most, not everybody. Even now, people don't want Bainbridge Island to be lily white. They don't want, Filipinos or Japanese or Hispanics or anybody. They prefer it to be white. But hey, that's not the way it is. But on the whole, the island was very welcoming. And so I think most of the kids just picked up at school like they did before. And, I remember school activities. I remember getting bused to school and all this other stuff, and having most of the Japanese that were my age were relatives. They were cousins. But most of my friends were Caucasian. So I don't feel like I had, any bad feelings about coming back. Now, when I moved into Seattle, I think being a big city, it was, I remember being called names and stuff like that, but, I don't remember much else. My best friends are still either Japanese or Chinese from those days.
So, did your parents give your English name?
Yes, Natalie.
Okay.
Right, when I started school, when I entered kindergarten, my dad said, hey, you get married, your middle name is going to become your maiden name. Should be Hayashida. So he didn't give me an American name. He gave my brothers Neil and Leonard, which I think is kind of unusual. But he gave me Natalie. So I've always, in fact, it was a shock to learn that Natalie wasn't on my birth certificate. It was always just Kyle Hayashida.
Did you ever go by your Japanese name?
Ever? I'm sure that in camp I was probably called Kyle, but I don't remember, having my friends call me that at all. In fact, it wasn't until 9/11 that I had to really be careful about putting Kyle in there, because all the official passports and all these other documents have it down as Kyle Hayashida on. Yeah.
Just going back to when you entered school in kindergarten, I just find it really interesting that the U.S. explicitly said that we can't trust the Japanese. We have to put them in camps.
Well, see, that's from the federal government, not necessarily from Little Bainbridge Island.
Yeah.
Where, yes, okay.
Yeah, and then then the war's over, and then they sort of have to take that back and be like, no, you're normal people again.
So I do know that the community was very accepting of their neighbors. They always called us neighbors. They didn't call us the Japanese or whatever, and I think that made a big difference, because it was a rural community, and now it's a little bit different. But I think back then, and like I said, because there was only one big school, the families knew each other through school activities, whether it's academic or sports or whatever. And, the Japanese, I don't think, isolated themselves. We went to churches with them. So I think there was a lot of integration. And most, like I said, were born in America. They weren't foreign born, and America was their only country that they knew, and their lifestyle and all. So they were very accepting, which I thought was very nice. And if you go to Bainbridge Island now, they have a memorial wall with the names of all the Japanese families, Japanese period, that were taken off the island. And there's starting a process of making, and it is part of the national parks system. And I think that's, a lot of people will hear the story of what happened to the Japanese on Bainbridge Island and how unjust it was. And yet there are people now that say, oh, they couldn't be trusted. You know, so it was a good thing because we didn't know what would happen. But 3.5 years, that's a long time. Now, a lot of people didn't stay that long, but they didn't close the camps. We didn't leave until 3.5 years. Yeah.
People could leave voluntarily?
The whole issue started going through the court system. And eventually they said, you know, they're truly trusted. And so if you had a job or a sponsor, you were allowed to move away from the West Coast. So a lot of families settled in Salt Lake City and Denver, even Chicago or New Jersey, you know, because they only were prohibited from living on the West Coast because they thought, well, that's too close to Japan, and you know, but they didn't do that. They didn't do it to the Hawaiians. And at that point, Hawaii was 40% Japanese. But it would have been devastating for their economy, the whole Hawaiian, to, you know, put their Hawaiians, their Japanese descendants into camps. So, and why they did it on the West Coast, I don't know. For a lot of reasons, like I said, you know, political and economic and racial. But coming back, I think I was fortunate to come back to Bainbridge Island, who accepted us. And I don't remember anything bad happening on Bainbridge, but then again, I was 10 when we moved to Seattle. So I was quite young. And I think kids were nicer then, maybe. I don't know. You know, and I never asked my parents about stories. Maybe they had some issues. But, you know, I know that my mother and father were both active in the community. So I think it wasn't like they didn't know us.
So why were kids nicer back then?
Why were
kids nicer?
Why were kids? They were probably raised that way. You know, there wasn't that you and me sort of thing, us or them. You know, I think it was a different time. And like I said, Bainbridge was unique. It wasn't a big city. It was a very small community. And, you know, there were mostly hard-working people on the island. And they probably shared a lot of experiences. And I think that makes a big difference when you share experiences. You can relate to the other person even if they look different from you or act and speak differently. And like most of the Japanese spoke English. I mean, English was the first and only language. It's not like, even in Houston, you go to Chinatown and you hear all these different languages being spoken.
So it's kind of like there's less awareness of people's race.
I don't know if it's an awareness of people's race. It certainly is an acceptance of them. I'm sure they knew that, you know, we're Japanese or Filipinos or whatever on the island. But I really can't answer that because it's really my parents that probably could answer that better than I. Yeah, because I was just a kid. You know, we did the same thing, I think, the other families did. It was a farming community, so you didn't go bopping next door to go visit your neighbors. You'd have to walk quite a ways. And it was a community that we had one movie theater, and You know, so it wasn't a mall. I mean, there wasn't a place like a mall where everybody would congregate. Of course, I was 10. What do I know?
Okay, I'm gonna go back to like your family from Japan, and then I'll like go to like,
Okay.
your schooling. So, did you say it was your grandparents that migrated
Yes.
to America? So,
Uh-huh.
Where were they from in Japan, and why did they migrate?
I'm sure it was economic, like it is with most migrations, you know, a chance to have a better life. But I think the Japanese were a little different in that they came to make their money and go back to Japan and live like millionaires, which, you know, my mother's side did until the house was bombed and the money was worth nothing when they got during the war and after the war.
Wait, literally bombed or?
Yes,
Oh.
literally bombed.
Oh.
Yes, it was on a run. I think coming back from Tokyo or something. The Americans, if they had some bombs, my aunt, who was American born and moved back to Japan with me, said that the planes would come over and their house was so big it got bombed right away. Yeah, and so they ended up living in the farming shed or a barn or something like that for most of the duration of the war. And I think I'd like to talk to my aunt a little bit more. She's 96, or she was when we visited her, 2 years ago? So she's older than that now. But she was 13, I think, when my grandparents moved back to Japan, having made their millions and wanting to, retire in Japan. And so she has some recollection of that time. I should talk to her more. But she also had a hard time because she was American, living in Japan, and Japan was bombing them. So she must have a real interesting story. And I need to talk a little bit more to her about that. And then my grandparents spoke English, so that was kind of unusual too. At least my grandfather did.
They learned English in Japan?
No, they, by virtue of coming over to America and, being in America, working and living in America for those years, having their kids, dealing with schools and businesses and whatever, you learn English. Now on my father's side, I don't know that much about them. They were in Hiroshima. My mother's side were in Wakayama, which is south of Osaka. But my father's side was in Hiroshima, and I was able to go and meet my father's youngest brother, who had gone back with my parental grandparents to Hiroshima, and they lived up in the hills away from the city, but they did say that they remember seeing the big cloud.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what was your grandparents' profession when they came
Farmers. Yep, they raised strawberries. And on my mother's side, he was a little bit more of a businessman. He managed apartments, a hotel, and that's where my mother's siblings, younger brother was born in Seattle, and Mom was born on Bainbridge, and and he did in some lumbering, because by then Bainbridge Island was just trees. And so he did some lumbering work for the sawmill there, but mostly it was clearing the land and growing your own berries and having all these kids to help you work in the field. I think that's typical of any agrarian society,
Okay, and sorry for repeating questions, but so
Sure.
your grandparents went back to Japan?
Yes.
After they had made money?
Right. They had all this American money, which was worth probably 300 or 400 times more than a 1 little yen would be. So of course they went back, bought property. I remember going into this little shop when I visited in one of my trips to Japan. I went into this little shop in this town that my grandfather's had known it, and they said, "Oh, you're in Nishinaka. I remember when your grandfather came in, he had this gold watch and this top hat. So yes, that was the reason they thought they would live like kings going back to Japan. Because, you know, if you had $1,000 American, it probably made you very wealthy in Japan, which was a very poor country at that time.
Were there a lot of people migrating to America from Japan? Was it like
I can't answer
trend?
that, but I do know that most, they had to come from Japan. All these 270 families, 270 people, that came, that had to leave the island during the war. Their parents or grandparents came from Japan. Yes. So the migration was, but on my father's side, they first went to Hawaii. And I think they were there in Hawaii for about a year because my father's older sister was born in Hawaii. And at that time, so there was an older son and then the daughter that was born in Hawaii. And then my father was the third child. And then there were 3 other boys. And one died at infancy. One was one that I met in Japan. I went to Hiroshima for the first time. And the other one that died on Bainbridge.
So how did your parents meet and then end up in Bainbridge?
How did my parents meet? Well, I think I got the impression that my grandparents on both sides knew each other some way, somehow, even if they were from Wakayama and one was from Hiroshima. Most of the Japanese that came ended up being farmers, working for others, leasing the land or whatever, because you could not own land unless you were American born and at 18 or whatever. So the farm was, that my grandparents' farms were actually in the name of my mother's older sister or my father, who was the oldest son then, American born. And I think most, because that area must have had good land. Everybody wanted to be farmers, and you'll find them all over the Northwest doing farming, whether it was truck farming for vegetables, berry farming for berries, or what. That's how they made their living, and of course, so they had a lot of kids to help on the farm, and they were able to feed their families by having farms. So I don't know, they were not educated. I don't believe that they had an education to fall back on like new immigrants would. They would come with education. They wouldn't come with just a knapsack and a shovel thinking that they were going to make it big in the gold mines or whatever you want to say.
So, your parents were like childhood friends?
Oh, how did they meet?
Yeah.
Well, like I said, Bainbridge is a small island, and there were just handfuls of Japanese families, and I think, they met that way. My father was 6 or 7 years older than my mother. And I'm sure, they met at school or whatever, or friends of friends, because I'm hearing that, someone was their best man, someone was, went with them. So all those families, the Japanese families on Bainbridge probably knew each other quite well. And so if you have a young, pretty girl and a young, handsome man, they're probably going to meet. And as a matter of fact, my mother's sister married my brother's brother. So there were a lot of, and then Seattle was not that far away. And my mother tells me stories. There were 4 really sweet girls. She was one of them. Yeah. And these boys would come from Seattle to come visit. And my grandfather had one of the few cars on the island, and he would go meet the ferry and bring them over, or they would walk from the ferry to go visit the Nishinaka farm and the 4 beautiful girls. I don't know. I don't know how true that is. That's just a story I heard from my mom. I don't think her sisters have verified that, but
That's the legend.
It's fun anyway. Yeah.
Okay, so finally we'll move to kindergarten. So what was like the makeup of the student body in your school?
When I
So
went
would
to
there
school,
be like
yeah.
only one elementary school, middle school, high school? that
Well,
you go
they had
through?
2 elementary schools when I went to school. And in my classroom, they would be me and 2 cousins that were Japanese in the same grade. And in my brother's grade, which is 2 years older than me, you know, he had himself and lots of others then. He probably had 4 or 5 Japanese in his class. Is that what you were getting? How?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there were quite a few Japanese families on Bainbridge Island. I mean, more than just a handful, probably at least 10 families, I'm sure. And what else did you... I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
Just like, how did you interact with the other kids? And like,
I think normal.
Yeah.
You know, I just remember just normal stuff. I really don't remember being exceptional. I got good grades. But, you know, we would play at recess. I see pictures and I'm thinking, oh, we're wearing skirts. And, you know, and even now, on Bainbridge it's nice because you go through grade school, junior high, high school as a class, and you know each other very well. It was a little bit different when I moved to Seattle when I was in the 10, so that's 5th grade. But it's the same sort of thing. You go to a community grade school, you go to a community junior high, community high school. I don't think that we were treated any differently. Of course, there was a lot more that were not related to me when I moved to Seattle. Most of the kids in the class were not related to me any longer.
So, besides the Japanese student body, were all the rest of the students Caucasian?
Yeah, most of them were just Caucasians, a few Filipino families that had come to work the fields.
Was it like a large school or only a small like community?
It would be a small school, and maybe the classes were 20 kids, 25 maybe, not like it is now. I mean, it was a rural community.
That's your primary school or kindergarten?
I'm talking about primary school.
Okay.
Yeah, it's because I only lived on Bainbridge until I was in the 5th grade, and it was different when you got to Seattle because it's a much larger community.
Did your parents raise you with Japanese traditions and Japanese food?
Really not, because they were born in America, and that was the only thing they knew. In fact, it was mostly American food. I don't think I had sushi. Now, I did love tuna, but I don't think I was really had a lot of sushi, the regular with the raw fish. It was pretty, but we had rice. It wasn't like potatoes. We would have rice, but we'd still have meat and vegetables, American style, and not necessarily.
Just with rice?
It's what?
Just with rice.
Well, with rice and meat and potatoes, yeah. I mean, separately or whatever. But we didn't have a lot of casseroles. But we did, when we first moved to Bainbridge, we only had a wood stove. It wasn't like you had a big oven or whatever. You can make these huge casseroles or whatever. By the time I was 10, we had a regular stove. But I do remember that old wood stove.
Yeah, because I imagine it'd be hard to find Asian food in a small town.
Yes, that's right. And not only because they have to come on the ferry to the island. There was this one guy that would come with a panel truck, and that was a big thing when he came. I forgot what his name, because he had some Japanese food that you could buy. Yeah, because I think the family didn't go to Seattle very often. And maybe once a year to buy shoes or school clothes, that for sure, and maybe, friends or whatever, because there were a lot of Japanese families that did not come back to Bainbridge. They didn't own the land, they were leasing, or if they were buying the land, they didn't have any money to keep their payments up, so they lost the land. So there were a lot of families that didn't come back to Bainbridge Island after the war, and most of them ended up in Seattle. So there were friends in Seattle that we could go visit.
Okay, so when you were 10, you moved to Seattle so your dad could work at Boeing?
Yes.
Okay, so how was that? How did it compare to Bainbridge?
For me or
Yeah.
for him?
For everyone, you know?
I don't know if I can answer that. I do know that it meant a steady paycheck, because that farming wouldn't give you that. And I do know that there was probably very lean years trying to get back established in the farming after getting back, because like I said, there would be 2 or 3 years where you wouldn't have any income, and 2 families lived together. So that must have been hard on them. When we moved back to Seattle, my mother got a part-time job working with old family friends that got her the job, but she was, just working after she was home by the time we got home from school. Yeah. And I know I wasn't happy because I didn't want to leave Bainbridge and my friends and cousins and all this other stuff, and so I got the biggest bedroom. But I don't know what else. And then I made friends. It's not like I'm terribly shy, so it wasn't that difficult. And Seattle was fun because the Chinese and the Japanese community, commingled. I'm not sure they do that very much anymore. But anyway.
I mean, you would have gone to a bigger school, right?
Yes, definitely.
And did, the composition of the students change?
There were more Asians, more Chinese. I don't know if there were that many more. I'm thinking of my elementary school. In high school, there were quite a few more Asians, and like I said, more Chinese probably than Japanese. But it was certainly more blacks and Asians in Seattle than there would be on Bainbridge Island. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think we all got along pretty well.
Did nationality didn't play a part at all, or
did the fact that I was Japanese play? I think not. I'd like to think not. Because I wasn't unusual. Everybody had Japanese friends, or everybody knew other Japanese. So I wasn't unique. Now, when we moved to El Lago, that was a little bit more unique. When we moved to Texas, the little town of El Lago, which is near Seabrook, probably Al and I were the first Asians that a lot of people knew, and they would ask if I was Hispanic. They didn't know what a Japanese looked like, and it's the same old thing. Gee, your English is so good, and where are you from? Those kinds of questions. That first I thought, gee, how strange. But if they see a black, they don't think a black is from Africa. But if they see a Japanese or a Chinese, they think they're from Japan or China. So that was a awakening. It was nice that I had Al. And we got involved. I never worked outside the home, so I was always a volunteer in the community. So that probably, there's a good side and a downside, but if you're looking so different, everybody knows you. And you're expected to know them. Yeah.
Okay, so in high school, what extracurricular things did you do, and what hopes did you have for the future? Like your job? Did you want to get married? Did you
all
want to travel?
All of them. Traveling, I think, has not appealed to me until I got married and we had all that extra money that you could use for travel. But I expected to go to the University of Washington, and I did. I expected to work a while and get married, which I did. What else?
Did you have a dream job?
Did I have a dream job? I worked at the University of Washington for a professor that took to me and said, come work for me, because he was going to be the new Graduate School of Business dean. So I went to work with him. It was a small school at that time. The business school was just, it used to be in arts and sciences, and then they split off and started their own college of business. And so I really got in at a good time, but I only worked for 2 years because Al left Boeing to go work for NASA, and that's how we ended up in Houston.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where did you and Al meet?
Where did we meet? At the bowling alley.
Oh.
There was a Friday night mixed league where he was a young a Boeing engineer from A&M, Texas. And I was still going to the University of Washington, but it was a mixed, young thing, and that's where we met. But it wasn't love at first sight, I don't believe. So we dated for maybe 5 years before he needed to come back to Houston because his dad had died and his mother wanted him to help with the family business and come back to Houston. So he was getting ready to move back, and it's like, want to come? So romantic. So anyway, that's how we ended up in Houston. And we lived in Houston for 2 years, across the street from his mom and dad's grocery store that I worked at in midweek, and he worked on the weekends. But eventually we found a place in El Lago and bought a house and moved there and adopted our kids and had the typical suburban life that most people would have, except I got involved in lots of volunteering and got on city council and did that for 12 years and still volunteering and not working.
What did you do in the city council?
What did I do in city council? Well, it's an elected position. We have a mayor and 4 council members. 5? 4. I think 4. And, you set policies. We run a little government. You make sure the garbage is picked up. You make sure that there's a police presence. And, loose dogs. Those are probably the main things. But the infrastructure. So I did a lot of everything. My areas of responsibility that I enjoyed was, interfacing with neighboring city and streets and sidewalks, because I thought those were important. So, but it's a small community. It probably is smaller than most community associations, so it's not a big deal.
I just want to get the moving straight. So you met Al in Seattle, and then you moved to El Lago?
No, we moved to Houston and lived in Houston on the west. What do they call it? The West End? West End of Seattle for 2 years before we moved to El Lago. And he was driving every day from Johnson Space Center into Houston, back and forth on the Gulf Freeway. And I just said it was time that we moved away from the store. But even after we moved away from the store, every Saturday he would come in to work the store. But at least it didn't take that an hour and a half from work to home. It came to be a 20-minute commute when we moved to El Lago.
So how did Texas compare to Washington?
How does Texas compare to Seattle? Well, we switch our seasons. We play in the winter here and stay in the summer, whereas, normally it would be the other way around. And it took me 2 summers to really decide that I wanted to make Texas our home. But it doesn't take long if you get a paycheck every 2 weeks and you get to know your community and your neighbors and you start a life here. I mean, you have to be flexible wherever you are, So I don't mind the transition. I think I'm loyal Texan now. After 50 years living in Texas.
You said earlier something about going to El Lago was the first time people really noticed you for being Japanese.
Yeah, being something different. It was like, what are you? That's mostly what it was. They didn't know whether we were Chinese or Japanese or Koreans or whatever. It was mostly a "what are you" sort of thing. But then I realized it was because Texans hadn't seen a lot of Japanese. Even now, there are very few Japanese Americans in Texas, and they're spread all over. They're not concentrated in a Chinatown or a Koreatown, that sort of thing. And I think maybe the way we acted so American might have put them off, not wondering what we were. I'm just thinking about that now that you've asked that question. It could have been, oh, what are these people? I don't know.
Since they
Because
don't have accents or something?
No, but we didn't have an accent.
Yeah.
I know. Do I have an accent?
No.
I don't think so. But I remember going to the bookmobile, just bicycling up to the bookmobile. We didn't have a library in our community. The bookmobile would come once a week or whatever. And they said, oh, you'll have to get your parents to sign this card to get your... And here I am. So I don't think Texas back then, was aware of a lot of third generation Japanese in their state. And even now.
Except in Houston. Well, I don't know about the Japanese community in Houston, but there are a lot of Chinese.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of Chinese. And Al's family has been here since 45. So we know a lot of the Chinese Americans, but not the ones that are, the generation that came after them from China, either from Taiwan or from mainland China.
So when you moved to Houston, was there a Japanese community, and did you get involved in the Asian community?
I didn't get it. There is we got involved in the Chinese community only because Al's family had been in Houston for such a long time, and his older siblings, they had groups, and you had the Dragoneers, and who else, honey? The Chinese Baptist Church. There were some Chinese organizations that I didn't know any Japanese, but because of his family, we did participate in Chinese things. Once we lived to El Lago, there was a Japanese American Citizens League, which I had been active in Seattle. So there was a chapter here, so we went to a meeting and have joined and are members there now. But
what do you do there?
What do I do there? Oh, we just socialize. There is a structure. There is a meeting. You collect dues and that kind of. And you try to, but the Japanese community is so small compared to the other Asian groups, and it's so spread out. It's not like we live in. There's Bel Air. There's Clear Lake City. There's El Lago. There's all over, and they congregate in one area on a Sunday afternoon. The only thing we really like about it is potluck, so you get to have some Japanese food usually that other people would bring, or they would buy from a restaurant and bring it. Yeah, so there's that aspect. But I think all over, I don't care whether you're in Seattle or in Houston, the Japanese communities are being lost by intermarriage, mostly by not having that political bind that because we're all different now, and by dispersion in the population. There's a lot of reasons why just the Japanese groups are tending to be more Asian, like the Texas Asian Republican TARC or whatever that is, So I think there's I see a change. Yeah, and even with my family now, there are very few of us that are 100% Japanese or 100% Chinese. The interracial, intermarriage, has made a big difference in that. I think for all ethnic groups. I don't care whether you're Jewish or Chinese or blacks.
Was there any pressure from your family to only marry Japanese or Asian?
For my family, because I'm third generation, and Al was there. They knew him quite well. There was not. I think the more resistance was they knew that when we got married, we'd be moving to Texas. I think that was the harder to. Now for his family, who his mom and dad were both born in China, and I think they certainly remember the atrocities that the Japanese did to the Chinese. And the fact that he's a male, I think, makes some difference. You're probably Chinese and aware of that. So I think there was a little reluctance, but his older sisters, 2 older sisters, had married Hispanic and Japanese. So I think it was easier for them to accept. And I don't know, you'd have to ask him that question. But I never felt like I was an outsider, unless they would all be speaking Chinese and I was thinking they were talking about me. But I think eventually, I mean, his sisters and family, his siblings, were very, very welcoming. So I didn't have that problem with them. But I think, you know, and his mom really was not that way either.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of cool that, like in America, all the Asians intermingle together, while they would never do that in their home countries. So.
Maybe you're right, yeah. And like I said, in Seattle, particularly, I think the American-born Chinese, Japanese, all, you know, I remember my uncle saying, "Oh, you mean that kid's Chinese?" He thought all along that Al was Japanese. But anyway, yes, that there's a lot of, because they grew up in America, you know, with American foods and all, and I think the difference is that the ones that are coming from China or Philippines or whatever now, you know, have a different culture than the American-born kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and now your kids. See, you're the generation my grandparents would be. Were you born in America?
Yes.
Yes, okay. But see, that would be my parents' generation, and I would be your kids, and your kids would be my kids, and you know. So if you go down there and you eventually, I don't care where you're living in America or Britain or France, you eventually take on the culture of the community that you're raised in. So I felt American, and I think I act American too. But I love the fact that I could be Japanese and go for that wasabi and you know, love some of the Japanese traditions that I'm trying to teach my kids.
So what would you identify yourself as? Like more Japanese, more American?
American for sure, but I like to say not Japanese American, but I'd like to say American of Japanese descent. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's I think this Chinese American, Filipino American, Japanese American, I think if they say I'm American of Chinese descent or American of Japanese descent, I think the American part should be stressed first.
Mm-hmm.
Do you plan on raising your family and staying in America?
Yes.
Yes.
Definitely staying in America.
Yeah. And I sometimes wonder about why my grandparents would choose to go back. But I guess...
Yeah, and how old were your parents when they went back?
My father was 7, I think he said. Yeah.
So who took care of them?
His older sister.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, his older sister did, and she was only a year or 2 older than he. So I don't know exactly. Oh, there was an older brother too, that was born in Japan, and he stayed in America. Mm-hmm. So I think the family did that. On my mother's side, of course, she was in. I wonder. She said she had finished high school when they went back. So, and then she went there and said, "Oh, such a foreign country," that she wanted to come back to America as soon as she could, even if she had gone back several times to go to summers, spend summers, go to school, and all this other stuff. Now, I'm not sure exactly on whether that's right or not, because I should have, and I didn't ask them a lot of questions.
So,
Yeah. So What was that?
Sure, go
Okay.
ahead.
Well, I was going to say, well, what are you trying to find out about what I was feeling about being Japanese in America?
Yeah. Did you, like, were you conscious that you were different, or were you treated
Yeah,
differently?
I'm always conscious of being different because I'm so darn short. You know?
That's not necessarily a Japanese thing.
Well, no, that's what I mean. I'm trying to be funny to say yes, but you can feel different by your physical appearance, not just your nationality, but definitely, people know I'm Asian. They may not know what I am, or where my grandparents came from, or what generation I'm in. But most, especially in El Lago, where we're a very small community, most people know that we're one of the few Asian families, and perhaps the only one in our whole city. Yeah, outside the apartments. I don't know about the apartments, but in a residential. There's some Chinese families now, at least Chinese last names.
Also, in my experience, I feel like Chinese Americans have their own unique identity that's not Chinese or American. So, is there the same thing for Japanese
Well, see, that's what I'm
Americans?
trying to
Since they're
say.
kind of spread out?
I feel like I'm more American than I love Japan. I love to visit it, but I still can't consider that a foreign country. Yeah, but I do identify probably more with Americans with Japanese taste. Is that I don't know how to describe that. Yeah, I'm proud of being an Japanese descendant, and I love things Japanese for the most part. And the thing about being being married to a Chinese and having a Chinese name, if I want to be Japanese, I can. If I want to be Chinese, I can. So, like I said, I don't feel like I just feel like I'm me. Yeah. And I've had a lot of privileges, I think, by being married to Al. And I've made it, I think we have a good life.
And has your cultural identity changed over your lifetime? As you've gotten older, do you want to learn more about Japan?
That's a good question, and I think it's true. Yes. I think travel does that. And not necessarily travel to Japan, but just traveling and seeing, there's a lot of different cultures on it, and I really and truly don't know that much about mine. And maybe it's time to do a little bit more reading and do a little bit more traveling. So that certainly is true. But I still identify mostly as being American rather than being Japanese. Yeah, and maybe in my parents' generation, they might have identified more as being Japanese. I don't know. I've never really asked them that question. And my grandkids are all, biracial, so it's like, I don't know what kind of questions to ask them. Although our granddaughter did say she wanted to be more Asian, right? Yeah, so I like the fact that Americans are more, on the whole, I think are very open to immigration and very open to having their neighbors being a different race than they are, on the whole, especially in a cosmopolitan town like Houston.
Right. So could you talk about adopting your kids?
Can I talk about it? Oh, which do you want to know?
Where did you adopt them from?
They were, our older son, Gary, is Korean, and our daughter is from Hong Kong, and presumably in Chinese. And both of them were in the U.S. to be adopted by other families who chose to let them go again. So we were in a situation that we took older children, and I don't know what else do you want to know. They were 5 and 7, almost 7 when we got them. That's considerably older, but they were with other families before we adopted them.
Like, what kind of traditions did you raise them with?
Yeah, so that's a good question because they're really raised mostly American with Chinese and Japanese food thrown in. Being here in Texas, there wasn't a lot of Chinese or Japanese traditions or celebrations that we would handle. What did we do any of that? Was there any Chinese celebrating? We would go to the cemetery and we would do that, kind of to honor your parents. We would do that. The Japanese.
Is it 扫墓?
I forget what it's called.
Tomb sweeping like day or something.
Hansan.
For Hong Song, if it were Cantonese. Yeah, so we would do that periodically, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And for the Japanese, they really didn't do anything. Yeah. My fault, I guess.
I mean, you weren't raised with them either.
I wasn't
So-
raised, but I was raised with Japanese food and hearing Japanese words being spoken. And
Did you speak Japanese?
No. And my father didn't. My mother, because she had some education in Japan, in the summer times would go spend time there, knew Japanese. But when first time I went to Japan with her, she tried using her Japanese. They couldn't understand her because she had the old pre-war Meiji Japanese, so they had a hard time understanding her because language changes. Yeah. So Al actually has taken some Japanese classes at Rice, because he worked with NASA in the International Space Program, so he worked with the Japanese, and I think they allowed him to take some Japanese classes. But, that's a good question. Do I identify myself as being Japanese? I don't know. What does it mean to be Japanese? My parents, there's nothing I can do about that except go under the knife. And, and because maybe if I stayed in Seattle and I was closer to my mom and dad, but being here for those 50 years and just seeing them 2 or 3 times a year, it's not the same. And of course, they grew up without their parents, because their parents went back to Japan, so they were on their own, and they were pretty much American. Yeah.
And how has the attitude toward Asians in America changed over the years?
How has it changed? I think as Asians become more politically powerful or more economically powerful, there's more push against them. And I think it's the same sort of thing pre-war with the Japanese. Once they got economically independent and they may have a presence of themselves that became more aware of that community, and maybe a little envious, maybe more prejudicial, I don't know. But I think Houston's pretty good as far as race relations. But I may be wrong, because we really don't live in Houston. We're out in suburbia, and that's a little bit different. But even the church that I go to, I'm probably the only Asian in the Seabrook Methodist Church. Yeah, there's not a lot of other faces in the community.
Did your parents pick up Christianity or going to church just from living in America?
Yeah, I think I started only because during the internment of the Japanese, there were missionaries that came, and I know that part of my families are Catholics because the Catholics were trying to help the Japanese, and I think that was so. When we came back to Bainbridge, there was the Japanese Baptist church that, there were the minister that would come to Bainbridge, and we would go to Sunday school and thing on Sunday. my parents never went, but they would allow us to go, and I would go with older cousins or whatever. Yeah, so I did go to a Christian church and baptized. So I don't know what your question was getting at, actually.
Just because, like, in your ancestry,
Mhm.
like, Christianity doesn't go all the way back.
Right.
So, like, have you ever gone to an Asian church, or is that?
We've been to funerals and marriages and other functions at Buddhist churches, yes. Shinto, I've never been to a Shinto thing, but the Japanese, I don't know about the Chinese, but the Japanese are very open. I'll talk to my cousins in Japan and I'll ask them about, why do you go to that temple, and are you Buddhist or are you Shinto? And they say, we're all, because Buddhism is a way of living, Shintoism a way of honoring your ancestors, and Christianity, hey, who knows? That may be our... So one of my cousins was saying, we accept all three. Why do I have to just be one or the other? Of course, that doesn't say much about their loyalty, but, and I'm a Baptist in Seattle, but not down here, because it's a different church in the Southern Baptist than it is the American Conference that we have in Seattle area. But I can't say that I'm a loyal churchgoer. I'm not. Yeah, because as I've gotten older, I've gotten a little different feel about churches and how they're a business, and they're looking out for their own interest instead of the interest of the community many, many times, and they're not as Christian as I think they ought to be. So anyway, I'm not a real avid churchgoer. I could worship my God in my own way at home.
So where did your kids locate? Like,
Where's what locate?
Where did they go to? Where did they settle down?
I can't
Are
hear
they
you.
still in Texas? Well, your two kids.
My kids. Oh,
Yeah.
What are they doing? One's living and working in Seattle. I mean, in Houston. I get Seattle and Houston confused. In Houston. And the other is in Porter, Texas, but works in Pasadena, commutes to Pasadena. And he's the one that has the 3 grandkids.
So they're both in Texas.
Yeah, they're both in Texas.
Do they visit you a lot?
What was that?
Do they visit you a lot?
Not
Like,
really. First of all, Al and I are so busy doing our own thing, coming and going. And, when the kids get to be teenagers, the grandkids get to be teenagers, they don't like to come visit Grandma and Grandpa. And the other one works on the weekends for a lot. And we just, we like each other. Most of the time.
So what do you guys do for fun now?
What do we do for fun?
Or
Well,
do you still volunteer?
Al is only, I still volunteer some, not as much, because Al just retired. Well, he retired from NASA 10 years ago, but he just retired from a second contractor about 4 months ago. So we do a lot of, first of all, we have to catch up in what we've let go around the house we're at our first and only house for 50 years. So there are a lot of things that we need to do. And we love to travel. We take at least 2 international trips a year, and various trips. I just got back from Hawaii not too long ago, other trips in the U.S. So we're in that stage where we can afford and enjoy going on travel. And we enjoy it, so we do it.
So how many times did you go? Did you visit Japan?
I have been to Japan maybe 5 times. I don't know. Al more, because he would go on work, And when he'd go to work, sometimes I would go with him, and sometimes not. But the first time I went with my mother, I think it was 81, and I may have gone more than that. We went last year, 2 years ago was the last time. Maybe 2 years ago was the last time. But we usually go on a tour, or we go on business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I like Japan, although because of my face, they push me around like I'm a regular, If you're American
Japanese
looking,
too?
they give you space. They're very, they don't shove you around. But if they think you're just a Japanese who doesn't know any better, they push you around. It is kind of funny, because I know enough Japanese to, if I say, excuse me, or, they'll say, oh my God, her face. I could say that, know the word face, and they'd say something about, I didn't know she was not Japanese, or something like that.
Oh.
But in China, they push you around whatever you look like.
Unless you're very blonde and blue-eyed.
Yes, maybe. Yeah, so it's what I like about travel is you come back and you really appreciate what you have. Yeah.
So do you think that you could live in Japan ever?
I could live anywhere, I think. Yeah, I think I'm very adaptable. Yeah, I would maybe not like it, but I think I could live in Japan for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because Japan is changing. It's not so foreign anymore, unless you get out in the country. And I'm sure it's the same in Beijing or, Taiwan, big towns.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what, when did you start volunteering for things, and what kind of organization?
The kids always are what start you into volunteering. Swim club, swim team, gymnastics, PTA. That's really how we started volunteering, is into school activities, because, like I said, Gary was 5 when we got him, Paula was 7, so they were already going to school. It wasn't that I had to nurse them or change the diapers or whatever. It was immediately school activities, softball, baseball. They both did things like that. And then on my own, I started helping in the community, helping start a community newspaper, covering the police department, covering City Hall, and eventually it just morphed into, if you're covering what's happening in the city, you get to know a lot of people, and then you decide, well, maybe I can make a difference by being on city council. So for 12 years, I was on city council. It was mostly my volunteering. And after that, it's, even now I just do a little bit with our garden club, and I'm still volunteering with the environmental group, and I volunteer with the League of Women Voters, and I volunteer with the Republican Women's Group. So that's pretty much what I'm doing now, is volunteering for those organizations. But I'm pulling away because it's time for the younger people to step up. I've been doing it for so long, it's like, I don't want to be committed to the third Wednesday or the second Tuesday or this. I want to give me my investment club. Let me make some money here. let me do some fun things that I personally enjoy. So I've learned how to say no to people that say, oh, come, we need you on the board. We need you to do this. We need you to, and I'd say, no, I'm not interested. I've been there, done that. I think that's something you're going to hear a lot. And now that Al's retired, we could go to Coshada and go gambling on a whim without having to look at your calendar and say, oh gosh, I have a board meeting. Oh gosh, I've got committed to do this or do that. So life is a lot easier at 76 than it was at 56. Yeah.
So when you were on all those boards and city council, did leadership or managing things and organizing things, did that come naturally for you? Were there any challenges?
Oh, for any woman, it's a challenge to learn to speak up. And I don't know if I've learned that yet. But I think if you know what you're doing, if you will ask questions, people are really willing to help you. So I think, I don't think it was a particular challenge. Sometimes it's an asset to be different, to look different. But I don't think it was a particular challenge once they got to know you. And maybe that's the secret, is to be out there and let people know that you know what you're talking about and you really have some ideas of what might be done. Yeah, but there are prejudices, and there are people that don't always agree with you, but that's life. And it certainly is part of the political life. You don't always get your way, or you chip at things, and that eventually you hope that you can steer the group in a way that you prefer that they be, or you can just quit.
Do you remember any really obvious discrimination?
Since I've lived in El Lago, you mean?
In like your volunteering sort of
my volunteering.
businesses.
Gee, I don't know. I guess not, because I can't think of anything offhand. I know that I was one time called Jap, and I said, wait a minute. He said, oh, this is a Jewish American princess.
Oh my God.
And I said, I don't like that. So that, he said, oh, I didn't mean that. I meant Jewish American princess. Sure.
What year was that?
Oh, what year? It was on city council. But it's just... Anyway, yes, there are times when they'll say, when they bring up, like at Ellington, they have the the recreation of the Pearl Harbor bombing. I think people have said, oh, the Japanese did that, or the Japs did that, or something. Mm-hmm. And people do think that I have real ties to Japan, whereas, my only tie is my American-born aunt who speaks English. And that's why I don't have to learn Japanese to visit her. Yeah.
Oh, you also said that it's an asset to look different sometimes?
I said what?
Like, looking different can be an asset?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, if you say, vote for Natalie, they say, oh, I remember meeting her, because she's the only Asian I've ever known, or whatever. That could be an asset. It can be a liability, too. But sometimes they're more likely to remember you if it's, because you're so different. I don't care whether you're in a wheelchair, like the governor is, or, have a face like me. Yeah, there's something different about you. Some people remember it in a good way and not just a bad way.
Okay, so going back to your college experience, so what's your major?
What was my major? In business administration. I ended up with a degree in business, but I started off in sciences. Yeah, I wanted to be a medical technologist. And one of the classes, actually had you go down to the labs and see what it was like, and it's like, I don't want to do that. All I'm doing is in a lab testing body fluids and using a chart to compare what the percentages are and writing up and I said, I don't want to do that. So I thought, well, I've got all these the science credits, maybe I'll go into education. And the University of Washington was great. They also had another class very early on in education where they had you take one day a week to go to a elementary school and then a junior high and a high school and kind of see how it really is. And I decided I don't want to do that either. So I actually quit school for a year because a friend of the family's said, I need a secretary come work for us. We need a receptionist come work for us. So I worked in his office and loved working, you know, but I also knew I wanted to go back to school and get a degree. And at that point, the quickest way was to get a general business degree, which I did. Yeah.
So, did your parents have any expectation for you?
I think they expected, like every Asian parent, they expected a lot of their kids. But I never got I never got feeling of pressure like maybe my brothers did because they didn't do as well in school. But I think I was pretty well self-motivated, got a scholarship. So I think my expectations were, I mean, I didn't feel the pressure on me. I just did it because that was me.
Okay. So, did you and Elle have any expectation to your kids?
Mr. Ong?
Respect your parents and study hard and don't disgrace your family.
Yeah, I think that disgracing the family is really very Asian. You know, the Japanese have a word for that too. You don't bring shame upon the family, sort of thing. And I think that's something that I had heard.
From your parents?
I don't know if it came from my parents or from, I don't know who it came from. But yes, it was the same sort of thing. I have asked a lot of questions of my family, my relatives in Japan. And I think maybe I'm learning from them some of these things. Because, like I said, my aunt is American-born. Her brother, who's American-born, also has family. So I have cousins there that are half Japanese, half American. And so I think they talk a little bit more about the shame. Don't bring shame on the family, and how you have to be very careful who you marry. I mean, I think those are two very Asian, what do you want to call it? Rules? Expectations? I think that's what it is. Get an education, don't bring shame to the family, and marry well. Yeah, and I'm finding also that the Japanese have learned a lot from the Chinese. And it came through the Koreans, and I learned that my dad always said, oh, the Japanese are better. But it's like, I've learned that through history and through time.
Ancient times?
Yeah, everything that the Japanese know came from the Chinese, possibly through the Koreans or morphed from the Koreans, and the Japanese have made it their own unique things, which is good. So hope you guys will take what's good about America and make it your own.
Uh-huh.
And take what's good from the Chinese and make it your own too. Yeah.
So I think that's all the questions.
Okay, well that's good. You know how to get a hold of me if you have other questions. This is more like just visiting with you guys and not saying a lot about me personally.
Yeah, we'll contact you and
Okay. Yeah, let me know how this works out for you guys.
Okay.
This is this is a picture of my mother and me being on the day that we left to go to Manzanar, California from Bainbridge Island. Of course, I have no recollection of that because I was 13 months old. But I look at the shoes, and my dad said I had a red jacket on. And my mother, of course, is dressed really nicely. I made her give that hat away one time when we were cleaning out her drawer, and I really regret it. The purse is in the Wingluke Museum in Seattle.
So,
And
what does this "I am American"?
oh, there was I should have showed you this. There was a
Hashtag.
There was a hashtag, I am American. I forget when it was, maybe a couple years ago, when they were trying to get people to, I don't know what it was all
On
about
Twitter
or
or
not.
something?
It was on Twitter. Yeah, it had to be on Twitter with the hashtag. Yeah, it's just the resolution on this one is not as good. But this is typical of what it looked like in Manzanar and Minidoka. Those are army barracks with the black tarred. And I'm right here, my mother. I could not find my father, so I don't know whether he's in here or not. They did allow them to work outside of the camp. Father worked as a butcher and as in other, I think, a carpentry shop. But anyway, afterwards, after they were proven their loyalty, and when the beet fields, there was sugar rationing, and in Idaho, the beet fields were there, so the farmers asked if they would allow some of these, the men, the able-bodied men, to come and work the beet fields. At that point, my dad was 35 or something, and was not draftable because he's older. But anyhow, everybody's smiling and looking happy, and it's like, I wonder if they really were. So there's those pictures, and I think there's another picture of this is me in the mess hall. This is what it looked like inside. Eventually, they put up curtains and stuff, but that's my mother and my brother, who was born in California, and me having, I don't know whether it was lunch or breakfast or whatever. The bad thing about eating in that situation in a mess hall, families didn't eat together. The little kids did, but if you were older, the teenagers would go and they would sit by them together instead of eating it together as a family. So someone had mentioned that was kind of a breakdown, starting the breakdown of the families, because instead of eating with them as a family, the kids would go off and seek out their own friends and seek out their own age group, and also get into a little bit more trouble too, because they didn't spend that much time with their parents. If they could help it, they would get out and do things on their own. So those were some pictures that I brought.
So who was taking the pictures inside the camp?
This picture was taken by the Seattle PI, and is in the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle now, Mohi. Yeah, so that's. I don't know whether you've used that picture. You might have to get an okay from them. And there were other pictures of the families being taken away. There's one of my aunt, which I love, and her family. I don't know what that is. But anyhow, yes, there were lots of pictures taken of the Bainbridge Island, and there's been a lot of things written about the internment and of Bainbridge Island because of the unique situation of the community welcoming them back, whereas a lot of places didn't even want them. Yeah. So I don't know what else. So I had some pictures, those pictures. Whoops. Oh, here's the picture of my aunt. Here's another one of my mother's oldest sister, who was American born, and her 4 children taken away, and everybody with just one toy, and she's carrying the truck that her brother had. Yeah, but the father is not there because he was born in Japan. So the FBI took him away earlier, and he was not allowed. He did not move to the camps with with his children. In fact, if you were only an 8th Japanese, you had to go. Can you imagine that? It's like, I don't think people understand, like, even Trump, his wife is foreign born, so his child, who was born in America, would have to go, and the child's child would have to go. See, those are the 3 generations, so it was a different time. Yeah.
So was it an article about like the...
Oh, there are just so many. There are lots of news articles about my mother. Yeah, because she was 103, and because of that picture, she was very vocal.
If you
And
Google her name, it comes up.
Okay.
so there were a lot of things. And
There's videos
it
in
was
the movie
interesting. Her
that's made.
when she died, I got a call not
I should write
only
that down.
from the gardener, but the governor of the state called me and said, "I'm so sorry, Natalie." Yeah, so interestingly, the governor's from Bainbridge Island. That's why our families know him.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there were articles and there were obituaries and published in the New York Times and the San Francisco Bay thing, Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I've got stories from all these people that knew us, knew Mom, saying, "Oh, they had a story on your mom in the paper." So she was pretty well known because of her age, and because she was willing to talk about it, I think, too. And she wasn't an activist. She was just a farmer's wife. But I think at some point she decided that she would speak up if people would listen to her. And that's what happened, I think. Maybe that's why I have a big mouth, too.
We appreciate that.
Can you show us like the picture?
Oh.
that you have?
Oh, if you Google her name,
Oh.
Fumiko Hayashida,
Yeah, like I said, I've got scads of stuff.
and it. Let me find it.
Fumiko Hayashida.
Yeah, Fumiko Hayashida. So,
Oh, okay.
and I gave her that name. There's a lot of images,
Mm-hmm.
but she's got to know which one is hers in some of these images. But there are some movies.
Mm-hmm.
What's her name? Made the movie.
Snow falling on cedars.
No, not that one. The what's her name? The
Oh, Lucy.
Lucy.
Yeah, she had, it was
What's her last name? Lucy.
Is she an actress or?
Ostrander.
No, she's a video
Filmmaker.
filmmaker.
Yeah, she's a regular filmmaker.
Yeah.
So did they make a documentary or something?
Yes,
Yeah.
she did a documentary, like a 30-minute documentary about my mother.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's available.
Do you know what's the name of the documentary?
Is the woman behind the clip? I mean, woman. The woman behind the symbol? I'm not sure. Oh yes,
Woman behind
Starwater Pictures.
Stoutwater.
Starwater.
Stoutwater picture. Okay.
Yeah. STOURWART.
Mm-hmm.